Welcome to the May 3rd meeting of the Mobile City Planning Commission. I'd like to take a moment to review our general operating procedures. Our meeting is divided into two sessions, the public hearing session and the deliberation session. In the public hearing session, an application or a group application on the agenda is called. The applicant makes his or her presentation. Commission members ask questions, if any, and members of the public may make their comments. Only 4 people may speak for an agenda item project and 4 against. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes, subject to questions by the commission. After 4 minutes, a loud beep will indicate 1 minute left to speak. And at this point, please summarize your comments. After all opposition speakers have finished, the applicant will be given time to respond. If you do intend to speak, please come to the podium, speak into the microphone, and give your name and address for our minutes. Please direct all comments to the commission only and not to the applicant or the audience. And please remember to speak directly into the microphone. On routine applications, the applicant may simply raise his or her hand if there are no objections to the staff recommendations. I'll then announce that the applicant is in full agreement with those recommendations. If there are any questions, the applicant will be given an opportunity to respond. After hearing all applications, the commission will go into the deliberation session. In the deliberation session, the commissioners discuss each application with input from the staff as necessary, but with no input from the audience. The commissioners then vote on each application. Results of the voting can be learned from the planning department. If some issues arrive in the deliberation session that were not addressed in the public hearing, the chairman has the discretion either to allow additional comments pertaining to those issues in order to resolve them, or to call for the application to be held over for discussion at a future meeting. Occasionally, 1 or more commission members may recuse themselves from discussing and voting on a given application. A recusal does not necessarily mean the member is directly involved with the application or the applicant. Depending upon the circumstances, ethical rules may require a recusal when there is only the slightest appearance of a conflict of interest. If a regular member recuses, a supernumerary will vote in their stead. The Planning Commission makes final decisions subject to appeal on subdivisions, planning approvals, and planned unit developments. The Planning Commission only makes recommendations on zoning applications, with the City Council making the final decisions. Please turn off your cell phones at this time. I'm going to call roll. Let's see. John Vallis. Here. Shirley Sessions.
Here.
Thomas Doyle.
Here.
Keena Andrews. Nick Amberger.
Here.
Bess Rich.
Here.
Don Hembry.
Here.
Alan Cameron. Here. And I'm Libba Latham. We will start with the first application, 4126, 4128, 4130, 4132, and 4134 government. Is the applicant present? Would you like to, are you?
Matthew Roberts, Gulf States Engineering. We'd like to request this to be held over rather than denial, to give us a little more time to provide the requested information.
1 meeting or 2 meetings?
We'd like 1 meeting, please.
1 meeting. Our next meeting is May the 21st. May the 21st is when you want it held over to?
Let's make it 2 meetings.
Mr. Chairman, is
Yes.
17th of May, actually.
Yeah. Oh, that's the following day one. I'm sorry. May the 17th. Will you be ready by then, or do you need to hold it over?
Let's hold it over another. Let's hold it over 2 meetings. Yes.
And, Mr. Chairman, if I may point out, the reason why we need a holdover is so that they can also submit a plan unit development application. And the 2-meeting holdover to June 7th would allow them to submit as soon as possible so that we could get it on the standard agenda for that date.
Okay. In all likelihood, this will be held over at the request of the applicant. But if there is anyone here today that would like to speak, anyone else here today that would like to speak in favor of it, you will have the opportunity now or anyone here today to speak in opposition to it, you can have the opportunity now to do that. Otherwise, we will more than likely hear it on June the 7th. Thank you. Item number 2, west side of Dawes Lane Extension. The applicant present and in agreement with all the recommendations. Mr. Vallis is recused on this one. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? Is there any? Yes, sir.
Matthew Barclift, representing Mobile County Public Works. I'm not in favor or opposed to it, but we have a request from the Public Works side, which is that one of the conditions of approval be the submission of a traffic and speed study that accounts for this development and item number 7 on the agenda. And they can be a joint study or it can be separate studies, but just something that helps to making recommendations to mitigate the volume and any speed from these developments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Yes.
Ursel Godwin, Sawgrass Consulting, here on behalf of the developer. Mr. Barclift and I discussed this earlier, and we are in total agreement with doing that. We just asked that it be a contingency on the approval and not something that holds us over if at all possible.
Thank you, Mr. Godwin. Yes, ma'am.
Hello. Eileen Bruette, 8826 Belmont Park Drive. I am concerned about this development because I live on the lake, which is right down the street from this. There's been no study as for silt that runs down into the lake off of the construction. And also the traffic. It takes me a dozen cars in the morning for me to even back out of my driveway. So you add this many houses, that's going to be a problem. So I definitely want the traffic study done. But also I think the silt study needs to be done as well, because our lake, because of the developments that are there right now, we used to have a spring. Well, now it's covered up by some of the silt running off of all these developments. Also, we now have islands in the lake, and where we didn't have those years ago. My husband has lived there his entire life. He's 43 years old. So that's a major problem. And not only that, because the spring is now covered up by all the silt running from the construction, we now have this horrible grass in the lake. You can't even fish. I don't even know, the biggest point is it's the beginning of the Dog River watershed. And so that should definitely be a concern. Fowl River watershed, sorry. Excuse me on that. But those are my concerns for this development and number 7 as well.
Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this application? Because we had 2 more spaces for it.
Against it or for it.
Just a moment. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? We have had 1 speaker. We may now have 3 additional speakers. Is anyone opposed to it? If you're not opposed, you can still come ask your question or speak.
Yeah, the only question I have about it is the water issue. Oh, my name's David Pilgrim, 8943 Dawes Creek Drive. I had give some pictures for y'all to look at. There's a big water problem behind my house. The neighbor to my right, when you're looking at the field behind the house, there's water behind that stays there, and you can see a tree line if you look at the overhead map of it. See, the tree line makes it, water builds up there, it goes through his yard and then through my yard and my neighbor's yard. The neighbor on my left, it goes through that woman's house at occasion. The way I'm looking at their water retention ponds, they're planning on putting them by Dawes Creek Extension. That's a 6-foot height adjustment. That water would have to run up 6 foot to get to that retention pond. I don't see how that would work. I think more water would come through my yard, and more water would go through my neighbor's yard. That's my concern with it. And that's it.
Kay Walton, 5399 Dawes Lane Extension. Also speaking for my father, who lives next door, 5399 Dawes Lane Extension, and another family member who also lives on Dawes Lane Extension, directly across from this subdivision. As family and as residents, we are exceptionally concerned about the traffic flow with this subdivision and the one which will be presented in agenda item number 7. Studies need to be conducted, and this project, we would request that it be on hold until those traffic studies are thoroughly examined. We currently have people flying down Dawes Lane Extension in a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit at 55 and 60 miles an hour routinely. An additional stop sign has been added at the intersection of Belmont Park Lake and Dawes Lane Extension. This has addressed some of it, but has not corrected the problem by any stretch. And an influx of population to this degree will definitely have a strong impact. My family members and I also live on the lake, and as expressed previously, actually living on the lake for a short period of time, we have seen a deterioration in the quality of the lake. The algae level has drastically increased, as well as shoreline problems and spring-fed problems as well. We don't have a second chance to get back these environmental options, and so we would request that the consideration here for item number 2 at least be held until these items are addressed, and perhaps held over as long as necessary to rectify these. Thank you.
Thank you. We may have one more speaker against, if there is someone.
Good afternoon. My name is Kobe Bruett. I live at 8826 Belmont Drive. This afternoon I was going to speak on this number 7 docket about issues with traffic, and I got to thinking with this other potential development in play, my concerns reiterate what everybody else has just said. The long-term growth of the other neighborhoods, we dealt with their sediment. Our homeowners association spent a little over $5,000 of our money to dig out our canal and our lake, with short-term gains that were great, but long-term we didn't accomplish anything. We had no voice in anybody that represented these building groups that said, hey, we understand we sent all this dirt your way and we're going to help you out. Once they start construction, they believe what they're doing is adequate, and it wasn't in any way. Potential issues too was the lack of understanding of the design of the sewage treatment system in the back of Dawes Creek. There's currently some sort of byproduct, treated sewage water. I'm not sure what it is, but it's standing on the ground on the dirt road behind Dawes Creek. It's been there for years. I believe it's noted and on the record that the design was improper, and they have not come up with a solution to how to expand that system to accommodate the neighborhood. I do not believe the new neighborhood will be prepared for the same type growth that fast. We haven't seen any current studies to help us with the traffic issue that I have asked the state trooper's office, I have asked the sheriff's department and the city of Mobile to help me with, which they have. They come out and patrol and write tickets, but it's been inadequate in general. We routed our traffic from 3 Notch Road through a roundabout straight into our street. And what is happening is, instead of somebody going to McDonald Road and waiting at a light, they prefer to turn down our long straight road and then take a left, and then they round the stop sign on McDonald Road, which just allows them to get to their objective quicker. So overall, my main concerns though is we have to develop a plan of dealing with traffic. We can no longer say the county does not allow speed tables. We can no longer be told that, well, nobody's been killed on your street yet. We can't really do anything. My dog was hit last week, and he only got away from me for about 10 seconds chasing a cat, and he was hit by a car. So it doesn't take long. We fall in a gray area. We're in the county, but we're under city jurisdiction as far as planning with these huge developments. So I need to see some sort of progression there. Are we going to start getting sidewalks? Are we going to have the right to ride our bikes and walk in our streets? I don't live in a tremendously unpopulated area. It is growing, and these are nice homes, and we would like to see protections for our investments and long-term planning to show some idea that people are looking out for county citizens too, as well as city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Mr. Donovan?
So I'll see if I can address all of the three different issues that were discussed earlier. One, the traffic study, obviously that was something today that we just found out about, but that, we're willing to work with the county on to see what the results of those studies are. Obviously, if there is a need for that, then we'll have to address that in our design, which, will go along with our standard design set of plans for the subdivision to the county for review and so forth. And, if it warrants some type of improvement, obviously we'll have to address that and deal with that. The second item, I think, was about some drainage issues there along the north side of the property. Our engineer has been on site. We've actually met with a couple of residents there. Could very well be some of these here today. I was not present, but I do know the meeting happened. We've identified the fact that there is some water that goes to that property to the north. We've seen one or two houses where it gets pretty high in the yard, and I think there's even been discussion about some getting in the house and so forth. One of the issues is this is all agricultural property right now, so obviously there's nothing there to satisfy any kind of detention or stormwater runoff or whatnot in its undeveloped state. However, what we're going to do in addition to those ponds is we've got a large drainage swell that's designed for the north property line between us and the subdivision to the north. So obviously that goal is to pick that water up that's going into the subdivision now that was sort of off-site water that may or may not have been taken into account during the development of Dawes Creek. But we're taking that into consideration. We're directing that water to the detention ponds. And then, of course, our ultimate discharge is into the existing stormwater infrastructure that's along Dawes Lane Extension. We've done some evaluations of that and make sure that that can hold the stormwater. The lake there to the east, I'm not sure, in terms of what our site today has on the impact of that lake because it is agricultural. So I'm not sure that there's sediment running from our site to the lake. Obviously, when construction starts, we'll have all of the requirements from ADEM and the county and possibly the city in terms of BMPs and erosion control and all of that kind of stuff that we'll be subject to and have to monitor and make sure are in place. So all of that stuff obviously is sort of a normal process, and all of which we'll have to be part of and maintain and put in place to prevent that from happening. Let's see, what was the final? I think there was a third issue. The sewer was the third one. So there are a couple of sites there that in the subdivisions to the north that I think are on private systems. We are not proposing that. We've been in contact with Malls and we've been working with them. Currently there is a 6-inch force main that is along Dawes Lane Extension. It's about 600 feet north of our site, and so in our plans that we've submitted to Malls, inclusive in that is to continue that 6-inch line down to our site, and so we will be connecting to Malls and using their infrastructure and so forth for sewer service. So it won't be a private treatment facility like is present north of us. So we should be able to alleviate any potential of they're being concerned about the operations of a private system, and maybe whatever issues are happening there in the north, that won't be part of our development. So this is a standalone development. It's not another phase of, any of those adjacent to us. So sewer will be, top notch and served by, public utility instead of maintained by the association or whoever maintains the one, say, adjacent to the property. I think that pretty well covers most everything, unless y'all have some additional questions.
Mr. Calvin, I have a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm wondering, because of number 9, if you look at the recommendation, well, the information that we've been given, it mentions about that new private roads should be constructed and paved to minimum county or subdivision regulation standards. And if those are private, are you going to have private roads?
No,
Or are
ma'am.
you going to ask the county to accept
There,
them?
there will be public roads, they'll be dedicated to the county.
So they'll make the county standards for
Correct.
maintenance, okay?
Correct.
And this is more for the staff, but when you read number 9, it mentions that they have to meet the flood control damage prevention ordinance, that's for Mobile County, but then it says the drainage facility requirements of the city of Mobile. So is that a blended situation? I just not clear.
It is something of a blended situation. Several years ago, with another application out in the county, there was an expression of flood control issues, and the legal counsel at the time said that the Planning Commission could impose City of Mobile design requirements onto sites out in the planning jurisdiction. That being said, when a plan gets submitted for construction, the city does not get to review the plan for compliance with city engineering requirements, since it is out in the planning jurisdiction. And I don't believe that Mobile County Engineering reviews it in using City of Mobile engineering standards either. So it is language that we have in here, but I don't believe that we have actually been able to enforce it.
Would that mean that our personnel would have to look at the design plan in order to certify that it was meeting city standards?
Well, the burden would be placed actually on the engineer to certify that it meets the standard.
I see, okay.
Who does that certification go to? The county engineer?
In theory, it should be going to both the county engineer and our office.
Which
And that's like saying if we wanted to say sidewalks. I mean, it was mentioned that citizens would like that. That is something that even though it's out in the county and it's not a county standard.
Well, also several years ago, in fact, I think prior to my working here, which has been about 12 years, there was a determination that sidewalks could not be required through the subdivision process in the planning jurisdiction.
Okay. Even though it's considered a standard for city subdivisions.
That's correct.
Oh, so, but the drainage can apply.
We can have the statement in here as we have had it now probably for about 8 years. But in terms of reviewing it, again, it'll be up to the private engineer to certify that they have designed it to that standard.
Which we are aware, and we've met with both city staff and county staff about stormwater regulations. You know, we've had to do some research on whether we're in the county and or the city's MS4 areas and so forth. So we're aware of that, and we've designed this subdivision to meet city regulations. Obviously, we've got to, like Mr. Hoffman said, we have to certify that we've done that. So for what it's worth, we're not going to gamble on our profession and not do, you know, certify one thing and then of course not do it.
And not meet that standard.
Correct.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Rich, that was the same question I had, so
Okay.
you've already covered it.
Yes,
My
ma'am.
question has to do with the comment that the detention pond is higher in elevation than the lowest lying part of the subdivision.
Right, so the northeast corner of that property is actually one of the lower parts of that piece of property. It's right now, it may be that you can go back to that aerial, there's sort of a wooded spot. You can see the contours sort of fanning out. So the highest point is right there, I'm gonna say in the east quarter. But there's the little wooded area right up in the very northeast corner. That's the lower spot of that piece of property. So that's where that water tends to drain. In terms of 6 inches of elevation, I don't have the topo with me right now, or 6 feet of elevation, but we wouldn't say buck grade and, you know, send water to the high spot.
Just a comment I'd like to address. This is just a general observation. The speaker before you made reference to it regarding the maintenance of the stormwater retention ponds. And I would just encourage you and your developer or any other developers that might be in the room to always make prospective buyers be aware of that. A lot of folks are very excited about buying a new home, and they don't realize that they do have a maintenance responsibility typically by way of their covenants, you know, for those ponds, and it's only years down the road after the newness is worn off and there's a, you know, $5,000 or $10,000 bill to go dig out a pond, that they really come to understand it. So please try to encourage your
and we definitely will.
buyers.
One additional thing, one item that the county obviously, or actually requires from us is a note on the plat a couple different times about common areas and drainage facilities, detention ponds, all that kind of infrastructure that remains private is the maintenance responsibility of the homeowners association. And we run into that in lots of areas.
Right.
But yes, duly noted, we'll make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to number 3, 2955 and 2989 Dolphin Street. I am recused on this one, so Mr. Amberger will take over for me. Thank you.
Uh, 2955 and 2989 Dolphin Street. This is a PUD for planned unit development to amend a previously approved planned unit development to allow shared access between 2 lots. Is the applicant present? If you would, please.
Afternoon, William Latta, Clark Gear Latham and Associates, 3901 Spring Hill Avenue. We are the engineers for this project. First, I want to ask your forgiveness in advance if my phone goes off. My wife's due date is tomorrow, so I'm a little bit on call. But as we move on to the application, I want to first go over a little bit of the history of the parcel and the applications that have come before y'all, and then discuss the current PUD. This site was rezoned in 2008 to B2. It was done along with a PUD and a subdivision at that time, and no permits were pulled, and that was allowed to expire. Since then, many different layouts and development plans have come for you. The most recent was in 2016. Bring that up because that application is, in all generalities, the same as this. Back then, we had three lots we were trying to provide shared access for. We have a couple of changes, and I'll explain those in a second, but that design was done with significant input from city staff. There was a lot of discussions with traffic engineering on how to best provide driveways for these lots. This was also analyzed for its compatibility with the map for Mobile, which had recently been adopted. At that time, staff in the remarks said that this was part of the traditional corridor district, and as such, allowed for retail and neighborhood services around these large intersections, that it should provide combined driveways and eliminate the multiple driveways that you would have otherwise. And it should also be a goal to provide pedestrian-friendly amenities, such as the sidewalk out front. That application in 2016 before the same group was approved unanimously. The current PUD has a couple of slight changes. Most notably is the access aisle that goes around the site that connects from Dolphin all the way to Sage. The reason that this was changed is because the first layout that was done, the survey that was referenced was slightly older, and it was actually found that instead of an 18 and 24-inch tree, there were in fact 84-inch trees. And so we did not want to take those out, so we provided a new plan to go around the trees and provide access. This current layout and design is basically being done to improve access, not just for the site, but also to minimize the impacts on Dolphin Street and Sage. With multiple driveways for each of the lots, it becomes an access management nightmare. I'm sure many of you have noticed driving down the various roads when there are multiple driveways, you get into a lot of stop and go traffic. That being said, by providing just this one common access for the whole development on each street, we're eliminating that impact. The site also provides good circulation, provides adequate access for emergency vehicles. That's the main reason for this application. The site's Zone B2. It's a proper use for the zoning. And so, in our opinion, this is really about the driveways. That being said, this was held over from the April 5th, I believe, meeting where it was recommended for denial. We held it over because we, quite frankly, were not expecting that recommendation per the previous approved PUD. And we wanted a little more time to find out more information and get some more information to staff. One of the main reasons it was recommended for denial was that there was not an overall plan provided. As such, you'll have a letter in each of your packets from the owners of the lots that surround us, basically saying that they don't have any prospective buyers at this time and therefore don't want to speculate and provide anything misleading to this commission. So, as such, we don't have control over the surrounding parcels and can't provide you with something along those lines. The other aspect that, and reason it was recommended for denial is because of the future land use map. In that, they're saying that it is recommended for low-density residential. However, we are zoned for B2. I continue for just a minute longer.
Let's get right. Are questions by commissioners? Okay, we'll hear up to four speakers that might be for this application.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. Casey Pipes, 2255 Ashland Place, speaking on behalf of the applicant, Rob Myers. And the three lots that are going to share the access are lots 1, 2, and 3 of the Graff Dairy subdivision. Rob owns lot 2, and the Graff Dairy LLC entity still owns lots 1 and 3. As you just heard and as you've seen, the staff's two grounds for recommending denial is the lack of a development plan for those other lots in the subdivision, lots 1 and 3, and then the future land use map. And I'll take those in turn. Rob doesn't know what's going to be built beside him. Graff Dairy doesn't know what's going to be built out there on lots 1 and 3. Surely we don't wait until all the owners and end users of all the property are going to be ready to build at the same time to do one PUD plan that shows everything at one time. I get it that you don't want to approve a plan that says build whatever you want on lot 3, but that's not what we're asking for. All we want to build is the access road and the site improvements on lot 2. When lot 3 sells and there's a plan to build something there, there'll be a PUD modification. It'll come right back before the Planning Commission, and y'all get to see what's going to go on lot 3 and how that relates to the other property in the area. But we can't wait holding lot 2 until that happens, much less waiting for lot 1 to build out or anything else to build out. The real question, that staff says that they can't make a recommendation because they don't know what's going to go there, I think they're asking the wrong question on that. I think you have to say, would the purposes and objectives of a PUD be advanced by having the access road or not? Would having the rear access road provide more flexibility, creative design? Yes. It would have fewer curb cuts to the street. It would allow traffic to come in from the rear. It allows more landscaping in the front. It preserves and actually brings traffic to these giant oak trees. There's an 84-inch diameter oak tree back there. And you see one of the proposals is when the build out happens on the other lot, they kind of propose this donut around the tree island area where those massive and that's more than one tree, where those 3 massive trees are. But having this access road brings traffic back there, takes it off the curb cut side of the road, also preserves the environment, opens up that open space area as an amenity, and provides more flexibility for building location. without the access road, all that goes away. And I think without knowing what's going to be on Lot 1 or Lot 3, everybody can still recognize the value of the access road in advancing PUD objectives here. And you don't lose any control over what happens on Lots 1 and 3. They're going to come back before you whenever there's an end user for those projects, for those parcels. The future land use plan was also cited as a reason for denial, and that frankly kind of just blows my mind, because I was in the same planning commission when I heard, this is just a plan, this isn't rezoning your property. Your property's still zoned the same thing. This doesn't take away your ability to develop anything the same way that you could before this plan was adopted. It's even a quote on the city's Map for Mobile website about how it doesn't rezone your property. But yet here it is, where we're not even asking for a change in zoning use. We're not asking to be rezoned to B2 from R1. We're not asking to be rezoned for anything. We're already B2. We want an access road that connects Sage to Dolphin that goes by our property. It's the only reason we need anything other than a building permit. And to deny it on the fact that the future land use map shows it as yellow, even though the future land use plan describes it as traditional corridor, which would allow this. And the descriptions of the future, in the future land use plan for what this low density residential would have it be, describes it as only being appropriate in existing residential areas west of the Beltline or immediately adjacent to the east side of the Beltline. This is none of those things. It's not west of it, it's not immediately adjacent to it, and it's not existing residential. Love to have any questions, though. Thank you.
Question by commissioners?
I have a question for staff real quick. I mean, like you said, this all boils down really to approving the PUD. We're not trying to do a zoning change request today. So we're looking at, does the PUD meet the requirements for this development? And what is staff's opinion that the PUD as presented meets the requirements?
Well, I would say that would be determined by the commission reviewing the findings of fact that we have listed in page 7 of the report associated with this case. You know, the Planning Commission did approve this in 2016, and unfortunately the approval expired. So now they had to come back to, again, get the shared access, which is the main issue as it relates to this piece of property as part of the planned unit development. You know, the question that staff has is, we have the future land use map now, which is different than the recommendations as part of the framework through the map for Mobile that were developed earlier, and using that as a guide to look at whether this type of use is really the most appropriate use for this site. But again, you know, as was mentioned by Mr. Pipes, you're not looking at a rezoning. So you're only looking at a physical development plan and the ability to have this property accessed through adjacent properties. So there's a possibility that the proposal would meet many of the criteria listed under the findings of fact for approval. But staff would prefer that the Planning Commission make that determination rather than
I understand.
make a recommendation.
It looks to me like, I mean, lots 1 and 3, even though we don't know what use that will be there and how those will be laid out, like Mr. Pike said, we'll have the opportunity to review a PUD for those lots once it comes before us.
Yes, that is true. They will have to come
And it looks like the shared access, I mean, we do have the service road going back behind the property, which would provide access to these lots without having to go through Sage or on Dolphin Street.
Yes.
Okay. Does the PUD that's presented, I don't really see a buffer as far as, you know, for a car wash. They're fairly noisy, and it's understandable some of the residents would be concerned about that. Is there a buffer that's provided?
In this case, since the property, the lot 2 does not abut residential properties, they don't have to provide a buffer. And we do have the site plan from the original 2008 PUD for the entire property, if you would like to look at that, just to see how it was originally approved in 2008.
That'd be great.
But they would be able to place the building as proposed and not have to provide any buffers off to protect any off-site uses, since they are surrounded by commercial zone property.
Any other questions by commissioners?
I do. In 2008, did it go from the R1 to the PUD with zoning?
Yes, the application did include the rezoning of the properties. So the two properties fronting Dolphin Street were rezoned to B2. The larger property in the middle was rezoned to LB2. And then the property at the south end, where there were apartments proposed, was rezoned to R3 multifamily.
Did they talk about those two lots, what was going to go on? Was there any information given to the Planning Commission at the time?
I don't recall. I think based on the site plan that you have before you, the corner lot was probably going to be a drugstore of some sort, and the next property over, which is our current site, was going to be a bank originally.
Right, Lot 2 was actually purchased by Hancock Bank, and then it was resold to this applicant. So Lot 2 is definitely a bank, which would still mean whether it's a bank or a QSR or the car wash, the PUD is, we're talking about access, not specifically a car wash use, correct?
Yes, and of course, this plan was submitted right around the time of the financial crisis that caused, the global slowdown.
Oh, but the community sat down and this is what they looked at, and it got rezoned based on this information.
Let me answer that if I can, Ms. Rich, and let me first say I represented the Graff Dairy family or LLC when all this was done in 08. So I want to be careful what I say, but I'm just going to not state opinions, state facts. When we had that rezoned in this original PUD in 08, the access shown on this site plan is pretty much like it was in that 08 PUD. When we met with the traffic engineer, we had this access line up with the curb, the median cut in Dolphin Street. There's also an access going, or a service road going east to another curb cut on Dolphin Street. The access to Sage Avenue, Mr. Pipes and I negotiated that easement for this development. That access can be relocated by the Graffs once, if they need to, when they develop or they sell it in Lot 3 and Lot 1 are redeveloped. But in 08, this was pretty much the same, well, this is the same access pretty much as what was in 08. We had neighborhood meetings with Mr. Richardson and all the neighbors, and they saw all this.
And they were told bank for Lot 2 was what was proposed, the concept. That would have been a B1.
No, I'm not sure if the bank was, if we had a contract to sell it to the bank at the time, this was subdivided and rezoned. It might have been after the rezoning, I'm just not sure.
Well, let me just add also that the plan unit development is a site plan specific approval, and the zoning is not a site plan specific approval. So there was no use specific approval necessarily associated in 2008, but it was a site plan and a rezoning.
And represented as such?
That I can't recall.
Are there minutes from the meeting?
There would be minutes. I haven't read them though.
Might be important. Thank you.
I have a question for traffic engineering. I live near this area, so what I'm anticipating if this access drive is built this way, that as traffic stacks up on Sage Avenue, this is going to become a bypass racetrack cutting the corner. traffic, is there any consideration we can make for that, or do you have any comments on that? Not only that, but also the development that is across Sage from this corner. I can imagine people cutting straight across Sage to get to Dolphin through here.
Okay, to address your comments, based on how the site is laid out, it's possible that it could be used as a cut-through. That is illegal. I can't do anything about whether or not that happens. The easement kind of is where it is at this point, based on the agreements they've made as far as where the access is, and it can change in the future. It makes logical sense that it is at the rear of the property lines, because it will eventually give access to the corner lot at that location as well. So as far as like locating it further south, it's actually a pretty good location as far as away from the intersection, but there's always going to be a potential for a cut through, even with the further development of the site. They've got a little bit of a bypass going on with the trees there. The queue of the car wash, depending on the time of day, that could deter it as well, because I can imagine that's going to kind of block that little cutoff that goes to the north of the trees. But there's not much that can mitigate it unless the developer chose to put traffic calming on their road, which is to their advantage if they chose to do that. The driveway that connects to Dolphin Street is supposed to be designed to be a right in, right out. We aren't promoting left turns at that intersection coming out of this development. So that's the proposal at this time.
So you said any traffic calming devices on this bypass would have, or this access road would have to be proposed by the developer. Is that?
Yes, and I'm not sure that the fire department would have a say about that. I know traffic calming happens in developments like that all the time, but that wouldn't be uncommon for that to be installed.
Any more questions by commissioners? Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against this application? Name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon, Michael Layden, 50 Sherwood Drive in Cromwell Place. We're here to speak against this, me and several of my neighbors. A resident of Cromwell Place neighborhood concerned about the proposal development on Old Graph's Ferry property at Dolphin and Sage. Our neighborhood is directly adjacent to this piece of property. It acts as a natural buffer border between the quieter, more peaceful residential parts of Dolphin Street on the east side of Sage and the more heavily commercial section west of Sage. We do not think retail commercial establishments in the area on the east side of Sage are a good fit. If anything should be built on that piece of land, we hope to be in keeping with the character of the contiguous properties, low density single family residential, and the other parts of the flume. We're concerned about additional traffic brought up by the Commissioner, noise, litter, and light pollution, stormwater runoff mitigation. We already have a lot of flooding in our neighborhood because of downstream infrastructure issues. And we feel like another acre of asphalt is just going to add to that. That big piece of property, while it is private property, and understand that it's still, as in its current state, a nice big sink for stormwater. I have a question about this, is why this and why here? In the flume, one of the main tenets of that is a walkable, bikeable area. And this here is the ultimate tribute to the car-dependent and car-obsessed city that we are. And one of the last large tracts of natural landscape left in Midtown. If this comes in, what's next? We understand that you can't predict what's going to go in. We're just concerned about drive-through restaurants and things of that nature, other retail establishments that are better suited for the north and west sides of Sage and Dolphin. I have other neighbors who would like to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
My name is Mary Zogby. I live at 2862 Hilburn Drive, and I've lived there for 56 years. My house was built in 1962. That was before the days that we really took a lot of care in what we put on land and how drainage works. I'm very concerned about the impact of this operation on the drainage in our area, particularly on Graff Court, which is directly next to this new area this car wash that's being proposed. When it rains, the houses on the east side of Graff Court, and two of these neighbors are here. We've got quite a contingent of neighbors here. That water comes directly into my yard and floods my yard, and then goes on to flood two houses' yards on Maury Drive. There's a sewer line on Maury Drive. After 5 or 6 loads of topsoil, and after putting in a French drain on my property, I managed to get the water out usually about a day and a half after we have a hard rain. Now this proposal says that they're going to put a car wash there. How is the water from the car wash going to be handled? Is that going to come straight down the property? This area, Dolphin Street, is the high area, and everything goes through to Imogene Street. And if you've ever been out there on a very rainy day, you will see more flooding than you ever believed. And we just have decided to put up with it because we like where we live. There's a ditch on the south side of Hilburn Drive, and one of my neighbors is going to address that, so I'm not going to go into it right now. But when you pave an area, and he's proposing to pave, well, you've got I think it's must be over an acre. So when you pave with asphalt, that type of area, the water has to go somewhere. And I feel like it's going to come right into my yard, my backyard. We would like this not to go through. When this was proposed as a bank, nobody had any real objection to it. But we're talking about 36 stalls for people to vacuum their cars. We're also talking about a 3,600-foot tunnel. We're talking about one attendant on duty with the parking place. We have no idea of the hours of operation that this will be going. Those of us who live in this area are used to hearing most of the UMS football games, okay? I don't know whether it's just the way the area is constructed, but we can go out in our backyard and listen to the game, okay? I'm asking you to rethink this thing because drainage is going to be an issue for all of us who live there. And with I'll tell you what I've done on that, because it's on the east side of my house, my heat pump and my generator. I took out flood insurance, okay? That's how much water goes through there. Let's don't compound a problem by okaying something that we know will feed water. And we have no idea what their plans are for disposing of water, but we're going to make a bad situation worse very easily for those of us who live there. And if they want to stand up, I would like you all to know how many of our neighbors are here. Do you have any questions? And thank you for listening.
Any questions by commissioners?
Okay. I have another.
Thank you, ma'am. Next speaker, please.
Jim Sudahay. I reside at 2901 Hilburn Drive, which my house is directly adjacent to the Graff property on the east side of it. We have several concerns with the said development. One being the noise level of a car wash with 36 vacuum stations and no buffer zone in our residence, next to a residence. I can see myself, I'm a high school football coach. I can see myself on Saturday out on my patio trying to watch and listen to a football game, and be kind of hard listening to 36 vacuum cleaners running at the same time and doing that. Or anytime I'm out in my yard, that's what I'm gonna hear, 36 vacuum cleaners with it. That's what they have on their proposal with it. We have no idea what the times are gonna be, their hours of working and stuff. If it goes into the night, that makes it even worse with it. I do not think any of you would want to listen to 36 vacuum cleaners next to your residence, as we do not either with it. Another concern is the lack of a traffic study. I do not believe very many people stop and wash their car or vacuum their car going to work in the mornings, but they do it at lunchtime and going home in the afternoon. And that is the most heavily traveled area on Dolphin and Sage is at those times, during lunch and at the end of the working day. So you coming from downtown, you know, it's a crossover traffic turn to get to it. If you're coming south on Sage, traveling south on Sage Avenue, it's a crossover traffic turn. So you got delays at sitting there at two lights at both at the intersections of traffic backing up because people have to make left-hand turns to get into the car wash. The only time it's not going to happen to people traveling to downtown, and in the afternoons you don't have a whole lot of that. You have some, and traveling down Sage Avenue, which backs up on heading north on Sage Avenue. So therefore, people trying to cross over from the traveling south, it's going to back up all the way to Dolphin Street with the traffic. So that's a big concern with us and not having a traffic study at all. I mean, before when they did the traffic study, that was for banks, a little bit, different with it and stuff. The other concern is that, and you've already heard on it today, is that the Planning Commission adopted on May 18, 2017, the future land plan and map that designated this land as low-density land use for it, and residential, land use with it. And that's what we like to see. I mean, we're not, in closing, we're not objecting to a car wash, just not next to a residential area. There's plenty of places around there, one being behind the Shell station at Dolphin and Sage. Used to be a car wash. I'm sure the drainage is already there. There's no residents around it. It's all commercial business directly behind to the north of the Shell station. And that, to me, would be a more proper suited place for a car wash, not next to a residence. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me that, that we want to make residents listen to 36 vacuum cleaners running from daylight to dark, or could be longer. I mean, who knows? They're going to keep it open at 11 o'clock at night? We don't know. And that's a big concern for everybody in this community. And I thank you for your time.
Questions by commissioners? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We'll hear one more speaker against this application. Anyone else want to speak?
Good afternoon, I'm Rose McPhillips, and I am adjacent to the master part of the property, not the particular car wash itself.
Can you give us your address, please, ma'am?
2867 Dolphin.
Thank you.
And it immediately abuts the Graff property. And as a matter of fact, I've lived there all my life, and as a point of disclosure, I'm also related to them. And I don't have a problem with them developing the property. I do have a problem with the car wash for a couple of different reasons. Although it's technically can go there because it's zoned properly for that, it abuts an LB2. And a car wash does not fit with an LB2 either. And I think that it will hamper the development by having the car wash next to LB2 where it's not allowed. I think it's going to hamper that. Now, I realize that I think that's lot 2. And then lot 3, I think also is a B3. I think it's a B3. or B2, maybe a B2, it's B2, because the purple is an LB2, and I'm just immediately to the east of the purple on Dolphin Street. You know, this city saw fit to develop that master plan of for the future land use. And I realize that although it may not be controlling, it certainly is something that was put into place, and it was put into place for a reason. And I think this is a perfect site for the future land use to come into play, because it's a large enough parcel. I understand that it's low-density residential. I also understand that low-density residential may not mean strictly residential. That's fine with the neighbors. They want the smaller commercial type of retail that you would see in like a village, like Spring Hill Village. This is a perfect piece of property for something like that, where the commercial is compatible with what else is there. We don't believe that it's compatible to have a car wash, which is a B2, and I'm not even sure. I know that the corner was, I know this was zoned back a while back because I came to that meeting also.
08.
It was 08, and so I came to that too, and I know that it was a B2. I never quite understood why the whole thing wasn't an LB2, which it probably should have been, but the future land use didn't come into effect until 2010. If we're going to develop a master plan on what we want to see our community look like, then we ought to follow it, or at least make it where it's compatible with that future land use. Nobody says it has to be exactly that, but if we're going to sit here and put in something that does not fit with that future land use, then we're defeating the purpose of having a future land use plan. Why do we even have one? You know, this is, you know, I mean, as I said, I know you can have an argument that it's not controlling. It's not. But it's there as a vision. And the vision should be considered by the people on the Planning Commission. The neighbors are not opposed to commercial. As you've heard Ms. Zagaby tell you, when it was going to be a bank, wasn't a problem. Because that's compatible with low-density residential. A car wash is not, especially a car wash with this many vacuum cleaners. You know, I've gone around the city. I've seen few, if any, car washes that have this many. Even Bebo's doesn't have this many stalls for vacuum cleaners. This is a tremendous amount of vacuum cleaners in a very residential area, and what could be a good residential area and a good village. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. The applicant would like to come back down and speak.
Thank you. The complaints that I heard all related to the land use, and there are a few others that I'll address separately, but is it or is it not going to be developed as a car wash is not the issue before you. Is it or is it not going to have a rear access driveway shared with lots 1, 2, and 3? That's the issue before you. Not, was it right to zone it B2 back in 08? Or what's changed since 08 that might make it appropriate to rezone it if it were to be rezoned? It's not a rezoning application. We're not asking for a variance. We're not asking for anything to get away from any of the normal municipal codes and ordinances on noise, light, and other things. Should we have a driveway in the rear or not? And that's it. The issues about walkable, bikeable, this is going to cut down on the interruptions on the sidewalk. The issue about stormwater, the site is now going to be surrounded by a road instead of not having a road if this is approved. The stormwater leaves the site, it goes west to Sage, and it goes south on Sage. It's not going to go to the neighbors that you heard from. It's not going to go up to Dolphin into the east. It's going to go to Sage and south from there. That's the way the water flows in this area. Putting in the driveway makes that possible. taking out the driveway stops that from being possible. Should the driveway be there or not is the point of the PUD. It's the only request we needed other than a building permit. We submit that it meets the PUD criteria. We'd like the Planning Commission to approve the PUD application, subject to the staff recommendations from the 2016 approval that were done under similar circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 4 now. Ms. Lakin will join us again.
Number 4, 5400 and 5464 Travis Road. It has been recommended for a holdover. Mr. Orrell?
Yes, Brett Orrell with Poly Surveying. This property, been in coordination with staff earlier this week and sent some information I think didn't get passed through as part of the application. We're not opposed to the holdover. I understand everything going on here today. This is, I just want to go on record, this is an estate issue. Ms. Doster purchased this property some years ago. She has 2 sons. She's trying to go ahead and divide this for them, for her estate, so time is not critical here. The question come up about the out parcel that's currently not included. That property was originally a 2-lot subdivision, and prior to Ms. Doster purchasing the property, the owner sold a 50-foot strip of property to create an additional buffer between Ms. Doster and that current neighbor. Staff has asked that they be part of the subdivision. Ms. Doster has let me know that her and the neighbor are not really on good terms. It's not a good situation. I would just simply ask the Planning Commission that we allow, since she inherited this problem, that we allow her to move forward with the estate and the division as presented and not include the adjacent property owner. So, you know, I'm not sure if conditions are prepared or if this just needs to be held over for 30 days. Like I said, there's no issue. It needs to be held over. Just want to go on record with that.
Staff did not prepare conditions. I was not aware of the additional information that Mr. Rell submitted until today, and I haven't had a chance to review it. Probably a 1-meeting holdover would be possible rather than a month.
So May 17th?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Orrell. Number 5, 6450 excuse me. This will most likely be held over. If there is anyone here to speak in favor of this application today, though, you may do so. Or if there is anyone here to speak in opposition to this application, you may do so now. You will also hear for and against it at the May 17th meeting if, in fact, it is held over. Thank you. Number 5, 6450 Half Mile Road. The applicant present and indicates that he is in agreement with the recommendations. Is there anyone present to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against it? Then we will move, it has been recommended for tentative approval. We will move on to number 6, east terminus of River Plantation Drive, Lancaster Estates, subdivision phase 2. Is the applicant present? And he has indicated that he is in agreement with the recommendations. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against this application? Number 7, 5580 Dawes Lane Extension. Mr. Vallis is recused.
Jerry Bird, Bird Surveying Company for the applicant. I have listened to the other concerns, or the concerns for the other subdivision that's just north of this.
Yes, sir.
The traffic study that Mr. Barcliff mentions, yes, either we'll have an individual or if we can get together and have a joint traffic study with that subdivision for Dawes Lane Extension. The lady, one lady spoke of the erosion in the lake. I personally have not seen it. I have seen an aerial photograph of it. It is existing today. We haven't turned the first spade of dirt out there. It is coming from somewhere. There's no doubt. We are concerned about that being blamed when construction starts on us being blamed for whatever erosion problem that is. Hope to get that addressed prior to going under construction. Our subdivision will be served by water and sewer from South Alabama Utilities. I think that's going to be coming from Labrador Trail down and around onto Dawes Lane or up into the subdivision. The recommendation, one of the conditions that probably most concerned is denial of access to the common areas on Dawes Lane Extension and Airport Road. Common area doesn't need a lot of attention. Every 2 or 3 weeks, possibly, someone drives in there. It's not like having a house that 2 or 3 cars go in and out every day. We would like to have that access from those 2 roads. And that will save having a 25 or 30 foot wide strip in the subdivision that will be taken away from lots. I know it is, the other items, we'll take care of that. And I know there's some opposing or some neighbors that want more information here. So I'll turn it over to them unless you have questions.
Mr. Byrd, what was the item number that you were referring to about the common area?
4 and 5. No lots or common area to Dawes Road Extension, no lots or common areas to Airport Road.
And what's your reasoning behind requesting that be removed?
Well, like I say, access to them, there's no reason why not, but it's not like it's a heavy traffic area. This would be for maintenance of them, inspection and or maintenance. And you go there every 2 or 3 weeks, as opposed to 2 or 3 cars in and out of a driveway every day like a lot. And Dawes Lane is county road. You know, it could support a single driveway just for that. Airport Road, don't know the status of it, whether the county recognizes it or not. It's certainly not built to much standard. There's a trail out there. But we're a long time before we ever get to the back end.
Is your common area up here in this top right, is that a retention pond? Is that what that is?
It will be, yes.
Okay, so
there's an existing drain that runs through there.
Okay.
We'll build on the subdivision side of it, I think, is what we'll be addressing.
I guess what I'm saying is, I mean, all of those common areas, you're ultimately going to need access to them to
well,
be able to
the middle
perform.
one does have it.
Right.
And then, of course, the one in the rear, that's an existing pond that, that's why I'm asking for access from Airport Road. It's just to loop around behind the lots and enter into the property at whatever interval is necessary.
Yeah, so what you're requesting is access to that common area off of Airport and access to this common area off of
Dawes Lane Extension,
okay.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd.
I have a question for the staff. If you look at the drawings, we're on 7, correct? I'm in the right. Okay. Yeah. And you have 19, 18, it's like it's 17, 16, 15. Well, the way they're configured, they have to have frontage on that main road. I mean, you're saying, but you really want that 50-foot road to be the only egress and ingress in?
Well,
these lots here are designed so that they face Dawes
Yeah.
Lane Extension. And, you know, it would be possible that this property and this one could have access to their abutting side streets in terms of driveway access. This one would only have the option of being accessed by Dawes Lane Extension, as would this lot, I believe, and even this property here.
And the top is a detention pond.
Well, I think this is detention. This may be another lot here.
Oh,
That's lot 20.
Yeah.
that is another lot?
Yeah, it's 90 feet wide on the
Yeah.
road
So,
and 120 feet deep on the right-hand side.
you know, typically when you have subdivisions come in, all the lots that are proposed are fronting and accessed by the streets that are internal to the division rather than by the abutting streets on either side.
Right.
On the west side here, Airport Road is a proposed major street, and there is a 120-foot wide right-of-way that would be necessary. And a wide right-of-way was provided when Labrador Run came through the Planning Commission, so it's partially there already to the south.
And this is in the county, so it could be commercial, it could be residential. There is no zoning.
That's correct. However, you know, through the private covenants, they could probably restrict that.
But that's not something we can mandate.
That's correct.
But the setbacks we can, and the number of cuts onto the street.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
If you can leave access to lot 16 and 19 Dawes Lane Extension, that would be fine. We'll do away with 20. Lot 20.
Say that again, Mr. Burton. You said 16 and 19?
Yes, sir. Lot 16 and 19.
The two that are landed.
Now, they're 320 feet center to center. Of course, the 50-foot road goes in the middle of them.
And then 15 would have access through Labrador Trail.
15, yeah, Labrador Trail. And 17 and 18 can come in off the new road.
And 20 would be Dawes Lane Extension?
Like I say, if you give us those two, we'll make lot 20 part of the common area.
Okay.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Byrd. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this? Yes, sir.
My name is Joe Kenny. I live at 5580 Dawes Lane Extension. This is where this project is proposed. I have nothing to do with the development. I put the property on the market for anyone to buy. Yance Investments made an offer on our property which met my minimum. We have not closed on the deal yet or anything. Now, may I give a little bit of a history about this area, if you don't mind? It's going to be brief. I can go back 43 years. I lived on Dawes Lane Extension since 1982. There's 11 houses on the road. The north three-quarter, this is a 1 mile road here. The north three-quarter was dirt at that time. There was only 11 houses. There's only, I think, 2 other residents that have lived on this street longer than me, one being Mr. Cornelius, Warren Cornelius, who lives directly across from a piece of my property, and I think 1 or 2 other people on the north end. I've seen this thing go from nobody out there to everybody out there. A subdivision was put directly behind and adjacent to my property. I did not object, but my concerns were just like the rest of these people that have spoken here today about traffic and water runoff. It was John Howard that put houses behind me. It's increase of traffic. Also, the exit at McDonald Road to I-10 is increase of traffic tremendously. I think more so that than the houses are on the road itself. Most of the people that go down Dawes Lane and on Belmont Park are not living in the area. Now, something will probably have to be done. I do everyone that's spoken up there, I agree with everything they say. It's going to be a problem with traffic unless something's addressed. Now, getting back to this property. Most of this property in question from Dawes Lane, where I'm at the very end of it, all the way up to Three Notch, was owned by Al Atchison, that used to have the antique place here in Mobile. In 1975, he sold 400 acres of land behind where I live to Flowerwood Nursery, who I was an employee of at that time. Then in 1980, Flowerwood bought a 20-foot strip from Mr. Atchison in order to gain access to their property because there was no other access to it other than going through Mr. Bill Brigham's property. He used to be, I think at one time, used to be the city attorney. That was bought. Then in 1982, I bought the land from Flowerwood Nursery in the front. Mr. Meadows, who's deceased now, had the property behind me. Mr. Howard bought the property from Mrs. Meadows. Her last name is Fultz. She remarried, but she's deceased as well. He brought the property from me, and he went up the easement besides my property to put his subdivision in. I did them check. The only thing I said was water runoff and traffic. And he's built a pretty good subdivision behind there. In general, there's been no problems. Now, some of the Atchison family have sold off some of the land to the north of us. And I've had to bear all of this because I've lived there, I think, the third longest resident on the road. I never said anything to anybody. The property was on the market for anyone to buy. Mr. Yance made an offer that met my minimum. And everybody's going to have to get it settled. I'm in favor of my neighbor's concerns, but I think they can be met. I've never met the engineer. I think where is Mr. Bird? That's the first time I've seen Mr. Bird. Basically, I've stayed out of this. Now, also, I have a nice piece of property. If you look on John Howard Company's website, they reference my property for the Labrador Run subdivision. I think when the first thing started in 2006, when he put his property there, it was called Rata or Acata Woods. I can't remember exactly what it was. Then they changed the name to Labrador Run. But I have no problem. All the neighbors behind me now are nice people, and hopefully, whoever who develops this and puts it into place will have nice neighbors as well. Now, one other thing, getting back to runoff, could you put that map up there maybe a little larger or something where it's showing the lake, Coal Lake? Could you do that? Perhaps I don't know if you look at the northeast side of my property, if you look across Dawes Lane, right there, just hold it, come on down a little bit, right there. That's Coal Lake. At the base of Dawes Lane Extension on the east side is a spring. That's where Fowl River emanates, right there. Now, I've had a problem with my neighbor to the north last year. Who bought this place? I believe it's Fan Global or Fan International bought this. They carved a road through the woods, knocked down 5 terraces, didn't put any gravel down, no nothing. I called them twice about it, and also I sent them a registered letter about it. They did finally, back in March, do something to mitigate the runoff. Now, I've heard something about silt buildup in the lake. Yes, there's some silt built in the lake, not from my property, but from the neighbor's property. He had no silt fence, no hay, no filter socks, no nothing. And still today, around the project site up there where they're building this house, there's absolutely nothing to contain runoff. Now, it has silted in part of the lake at that cove. But getting back to where we're at before, I've been there a long time. I've seen it go from just, like I said, 11 houses when we moved there, to 40 houses on the road. Mr. Howard, I believe it's 105 houses behind me now. Dawes Oaks and Dawes Lane, I believe that's 122 houses there for a total of approximately 267 houses. So this is not like this has happened today. This has been going on for a number of years. And hopefully the developer will consider the neighbors, put in nice homes, mitigate runoff, also mitigate traffic. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else here to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against it? Come on down. One at a time, please.
My name's Lindsey Walker. I live at 3200 Winfield Drive, but I'm one of the partners in the John Howard development that Mr. Kenny referred to. And I'm not here to speak against it. We're developers. I've never spoke against the development, but I've spoke up here many times in favor of our developments. So I'm not going to tell you one side and then turn to the other side. I'm not opposed to the development, but I have questions, as I think, as an obligation to the people that we have built houses for and sold houses for, and we also have other land that we hope to develop, and we'll be coming before you guys as responsible citizens. And we found out about this subdivision. I've yet to see a plat that showed the dimensions of the lots. So my concern are the lots numbered 1 through 15 or 16 up here, which would have direct access on the Labrador Trail. And even though that's not a major street per se, it is the access to 400 lots in Labrador, of which 105, for Mr. Kenny, which I think he's pretty close to being right, have been developed. And I don't know the size of those lots, but if they're less than 90 or 95 feet wide, they probably cannot have a side entry garage and a turn-ins, which means the garage is probably going to be facing the street, which means backing out into it. And I would just ask that the developer or the developer's representative, that this be held over, and that the representative and the developer would meet with the homeowners that we don't really represent, but I took the opportunity to speak for them today, that they would get with them and at least give them some satisfaction as to what's going to be done with respect to traffic, or specifically address those particular lots as to how the people are going to be coming into the street. And that would be my wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else to speak? Yes, sir.
Sorry about cutting you off there. First off, I'd like to thank, I'm Kobe Bruett, once again, 8826 Belmont Park Drive. I live just adjacent to the proposed development. I'd like to thank the council for the opportunity to talk about some of our concerns and represent our neighbors. I think some of them will speak in a minute. While you got that sketch up, I'm going to jump around. First off, you know, we mentioned with the other development that has not started how much growth is going to be, how quickly it's going to happen. But when you look at the size of this property, other than putting apartments on it, I don't know how you could have put any more houses on that small amount of property. I live on the east end of the entrance of it where the lake starts. There is no way that you can shed that much water with that much asphalt, that many driveways and roof lines, and shed that water with that small retention pond. We have taken the burden of all this development in our lake, and we don't have anybody to defend us. The county is inadequately prepared for these type problems. We have, as a city, really hurt Dog River watershed because we didn't look at it close enough, and we have sent trash down it. We send fertilizers, pesticides, just overall garbage. And my hope as a citizen one day is to live on Fowl River. This is the beginning of Fowl River. If you need to trace it out, you can. These are the springs that feed Fowl River. This is clear water that goes over this dam, more than 2 inches in the summer. In the hottest part of the summer, we send that way. I asked for this to be held back at least 2 meetings so we can be adequately prepared. I believe there was not proper notification to all my neighbors that border this property. I'm pretty confident in that. It's hard to gather information from everybody, but at this point, I don't believe everybody was properly notified. To reiterate some of my issues earlier, the traffic, there has to be a plan before. We cannot backwards plan. This is 119 lots. These are smaller homes. I would take it each one would have 2 cars, possibly 3. You cannot backwards plan that type of development. We all have to be at work at the same time, whether we're going to the public schools to get our children or back and forth to work. We can't get out of our driveways now. We have a stop sign on the McDonald Road end that backs up. People are so impatient that they want to pass around the oak tree that's in our road and go around them and then run the stop sign because they don't want to get caught held there because they're going to be late to work, unfortunately. I've heard it mentioned numerous times, this is Dawes Lane Extension. This is not Dawes Road. I live on Belmont Park Drive. These are not roads, these are streets. And I wish planning would look at that we don't want the type traffic in the future to be road speed traffic. The developer that was just here did not mention the long-term plan is to run a road right behind this development that lines up with roads, you know, that are adjacent to this property, which would put highway traffic through. If you look at the proposed development there, that would put highway traffic through the current neighborhood, that nobody in that neighborhood that bought expected that to happen. And I know there's a vision of the county and the city long term, but nobody was warned that, hey, here soon we're going to put a road through the middle of your neighborhood. While you're looking at that, I want to mention sediment runoff. Who will be responsible for the sediment runoff? It will be there. They will put their cones and their socks full of cotton or straw, but it still gets in the streets and runs down the streets. The elevation of this property is way above our lake, and the upper lake and the lower lake have now filled with sediment. Nobody is responsible. I need to know by the next meeting who would be responsible for that in the future. Would it be the owners of this neighborhood properties, or would it be a developer? I also would like to look at some of the size of the developments. Is there any opportunities that we could speak to the developer and look at saving some land per property and building larger homes rather than trying to maximize the amount of homes put on the property? We have issues with the county not having the funding to fix the roads that are there now. The burden from the traffic has been so heavy that the roads have been destroyed for a while, and they have done all they can do to temporarily fix it, but during most rainy afternoons we have water standing at the midline in our road because of drainage, and it takes usually 2 or 3 hot days for that water to go away. It will not drain because it's sitting flat on our roads right now. So there's been concerns. The county's trying to work on that, but due to funding they haven't been able to. Overall, I just want to try to emphasize the fact that we do fall in the city's planning jurisdiction. This is the future of the city, and I just ask that you guys please take your due diligence, look at this closely, and try to think of what your vision and what this area you want it to be for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barrett.
Good afternoon. I'm John Howard from Omni Park Drive. I'm the named developer, but I'm one of several, including Mr. Walker, who's just talked to you. I first of all want to thank Mr. Kinney for the nice things he said to say about the developer, and I can say the same for him. And I can tell you one thing: I don't think I've ever had an occasion where I lost a neighbor, where I'm going to lose a neighbor, that I was more sorry. From what Mr. Kinney has to what is being proposed is like going from having a large lake with your fish and having everything put in a sardine can. And if you kind of look at that layout and look at the other one, I know Mr. Kinney talked about over a period of 25 or 30 years how it's gone from 11 houses to what, however many. These two subdivisions alone, one of them has got 119 feet in it, and the lots in it, and the other one 140. That's 269 houses on about 40 acres of land. We don't have that many going on 100 acres of land on our property. I noticed on the Belmont Park subdivision, and by the way, I want to point something out. I received a letter on the 13th of April about this, which is proper timing. I went down and asked several engineers and developers I knew, who's doing this? No one knew. And then I talked to someone at one of the utility companies, and they said, oh no, this is not going to touch your property. They were confusing. The two pieces got put in at the same time, and they got confused. I didn't even know about the other one until yesterday. So I got this, and I started trying to get information. Then about a week or so ago, I called. It said on here to get on the web page and go to planning, and you can see what it is. Well, I did that, and nothing showed up. So then I called down, as it called for, to the Planning Commission and got a hold of an extremely nice lady named Lisa Watkins. Could not be any more helpful, and y'all, I don't know that I've met her. Is that you? No, I didn't know that was you. Well, I'm glad I said nice things, but I said it because it's true.
She's right next to you.
She's redheaded, you don't want to make her mad.
No, she was extremely nice. And I had no idea she was sitting over there. And she said at the time, she looked at it and she said, we don't have it yet. As I recall, we were understaffed and overworked and things we hadn't got it up yet. We're going to try to get it up, I believe, by Friday, I believe you said. And it really didn't get up till sometime Monday afternoon, as I recall. I wasn't able to get a copy, and then on Tuesday I started trying to get it off the thing, and I still couldn't get it to print. So I called her again, and she was nice enough yesterday to print up the whole form and send it to me by email. So again, she was very helpful, but the timing is what's bad. And what I got was all of this stuff, with this little bit of stuff right here, showing nothing but what you got up there, but without any lot size numbers on it at all. And we got one day to make a decision on that. That's just the timing of this situation and almost the secrecy, because nobody seems to know about what was going on, is strange. And I'm not saying anything about anybody, but we haven't had time to really look at this. Then after I got a hold of her, I called Jerry Bird, who's a friend of mine and a very nice person, I also might add. And he was kind enough to send me a little thing that showed some lot number sizes on it. And I also got a copy of what's going into the other subdivision, which are all 60-foot lots. This little subdivision here has mostly 60-foot lots and some less in the back. And they do have 80-foot lots on the front. But here's the problem. This is going in on we put this street in as an entranceway to our subdivision. We got 105 houses out there, and they're now talking about putting 15 houses from corner to corner on 80-foot lots, which would not give you enough room to do side entry garages. So you're looking at 15 houses that are going to be backing out into a way that's already serving 105 houses, and we have another 200 and something houses approved for down the line. So something's got to happen. There's just not, it just can't be that we have front entry garages and everybody backs out on that. There should be a way of working this out to where you don't have all these houses on the front. I don't know what the answer is. What I'm asking is that you give us a 2-week or a 4-week layover on this, as I believe the Planning Commission staff has recommended, and then let us get a chance to get with the engineers and the owners and the homeowners in our subdivision and the homeowners in Belmont Park and look at this. What they're putting in these little bitty lots doesn't fit into the neighborhood. And I think there should be something differently done. Again, I don't speak against developers very often, but I'm not against development, but it needs to be done properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Yeah, they got room for one more thing.
One more then. I'm sorry, I thought Mr. Howard was fourth. Your lucky day.
Woohoo! I'm Brad Cooper. My address is 5529 Dawes Lane Extension. My driveway sits directly across lot number 20. My concern, I'm understanding that I live in the county. I'm expecting there's going to be development. There's a lot of farmland, a lot of new development in the area. It's to be expected. The major concerns that I had as I was reviewing this are, one, the density of the subdivision is just way too much. Compared to proposal number 2 on the same size lot, same acreage, with only 40 properties compared to 119 here, it speaks for itself. I don't really need to go into that. The other more major concern is the little canal that feeds off of Dawes Lane runs right through Mr. Kinney's property, and as he had mentioned before, the lot adjacent, the one to the north, is where the springs begin, and right at the entranceway where that lot of trees is on the northeast corner of the lot is a pretty intense depression where a creek bed runs through, which is a proposed area for a common area here. And I just don't think that there should be any consideration for any type of development in that area. I would prefer to see larger lots. I would prefer to see, if you were to travel north up to Dawes Oak and Dawes Creek subdivisions, both have some density to them, one more than the other. Both only have one opportunity for ingress and egress onto Dawes Lane Extension. And along the front of those subdivisions is a fence line or some sort of I would prefer to see a blocked fence personally, but you know, some sort of a fence line running parallel to Dawes Lane Extension north to south all the way from Labrador to the end of the property line. No development along that area, and then reconfigure the plot within the area for larger lot sizes to accommodate other concerns. If you travel through from Belmont, which is a street, a 20-mile-per-hour street that people just love to travel 40 to 45 miles per hour on, but every home along there, it's a little more dense than most of the properties that you find along Dawes Lane Extension. But every property along there does have a side entry garage, and that type of development would probably be more in keeping with like Mr. Howard was mentioning a moment ago. And the other thing is with regard to the ingress and egress of the individual driveways onto Dawes Lane Extension, I just think there's too much there. When you look at all the other properties along Dawes Lane Extension, most are large acreage lots with very long setbacks for the properties until you reach the areas of subdivision. The areas of subdivision then are separated by a fence line between Dawes Lane Extension and the actual subdivision itself. So in keeping with that model, I think this would probably be something that could be agreeable and beneficial for the area. And then but the bigger concern is the water runoff through that canal. It's a pretty major depression as it feeds into Coal Lake right there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Mr. Chairman, if I may point out a clarification. This application is 119 lots as proposed. Application number 2, the Preserve, they're proposing a multi-phase development, and only phase 1 of 49 lots was before you, but the total development is proposed to be 140 lots.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Mr. Byrd, okay, we will move on to number 8. No, sir, I'm sorry. Number 8, 2720 Government Boulevard. Applicant present. And in agreement with the recommendations? Okay, thank you. Is there anyone here to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against it? We'll move on to number 9, 558 and 560 Houston Street. It has been recommended for tentative approval. Is the applicant present?
Yeah, the subdivision is recommended for approval. We had 2 applications, subdivision and PUD. We're okay with the subdivision. Except for item 9, because the staff has stated that they are recommending we withdraw the PUD request and bring it up at the Board of Adjustment. And we will withdraw that. We know we need Board of Adjustment anyway. So number 9 needs to be stricken from the subdivision, which speaks of a revised PUD plan.
And you're withdrawing your
PUD.
PUD?
Yes. and we'll submit a Board of Adjustment that will address 3 items.
Thank you, Mr. Byrd. Is there anyone here to speak again? Anyone else here to speak in favor of this application? Is there anyone here to speak against this application? Thank you. We will move into the deliberation session. Number 1, the applicant has requested a holdover till June 7th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 2, recommended for tentative approval.
Ballas is recusing.
I recommend it be approved according to staff recommendation with the traffic study, I believe.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Should we not be taking number 2 and number 7 together?
And
there are 2 separate applications. Do we need to take them together, Mr. Hall?
Well, Mr. Barcliff did request that both of number 2 and number 7 have the traffic study either jointly or separately. So we could have separate votes on those and they don't have to be taken together.
Should we have the results of those traffic studies back prior to approving the application?
that'd be good.
Could be subject.
That would really be something that county engineering would have to determine. It may be that the results of the study will result in changes to the design of the subdivision, which certainly would not result in an increase in the number of lots, I don't believe. Might result in a decrease, so there may not be a need to get a new approval from the Planning Commission unless county engineering believes that they would like to have it held over. And
I mean, if we have the traffic study done as part of the requirement,
right,
and whatever the results are, I mean, they're going to have to comply with. Right.
And we're talking about they probably still have, you know, a couple of months of design process with the roads and such.
Right.
And so there is a leeway in there, both phase developments, and so there's some time for us to incorporate any recommendations.
Going to the stormwater drainage issue, I mean, it's just clarification. We're requiring that it meet the city requirements, but it doesn't have the, we have no checks and balances with that.
No, and this is a problem since we started having this in these reports for the planning jurisdiction. It's never been resolved.
Could we require that a copy of that report be sent to the staff?
We can ask that the certification by the private engineer be provided to the planning department as well as to county engineering, yes.
Okay.
This is a question for the county. I know, you know, the typical design standards for drainage are 10-year design storms, 10-year release storms. The city will oftentimes go to a stricter design standard, you know, for a bigger design storm, a smaller release. Is that part of the county's requirements at all? And if so, is that ever enforced in your developments?
Right now, that is not part of our requirements. Now, if the subdivisions are located within our MS4 boundary, and both of these lie just outside our MS4 boundary, we have stricter requirements and the ability to require more there, but outside of the MS4, no, sir.
But does the county have the latitude to make the county engineer have the latitude to make those stricter requirements if he chose desires to?
Generally speaking, we don't recognize that we do.
If the Planning Commission has the authority, did we not hear that about drainage, not sidewalks? I was incorrect about that, being able to, but drainage and stormwater management.
Well, because it is a concern that has been expressed, that's
Right.
why we have these conditions, and that's why the Planning Commission requires them. So the previous legal advice was that, yes, the Planning Commission does have that authority.
Would the county be capable of knowing what our requirements would be so that they were met by the engineering plans?
We generally try to allow the Planning Commission and the city to being more intimately familiar with the regulations to enforce those, rather than assume the liability for enforcing a planning commission or city requirement.
And that would be approving the plans, and so it would take some work power from the staff that work for the citizens of Mobile city limits. Is that what you're saying?
Yes,
Because
ma'am.
it's looking at plans and then it comes in from an engineering firm, they have signed on it,
Yes, ma'am.
but it would take another review by city engineering.
And we will be more than happy to, if the city and commission so requests, to forward those down to the city engineering department and let them have a review where we work together on it.
Matthew, our condition states requiring submission of a certification from the licensed engineer certifying the design complies with the stormwater detention and drainage facility requirements of the city of Mobile. If that's filed, do y'all rely on that? Do y'all wait on that before issuing any permits, or is it just fall on deaf ears when it gets to your office?
We generally rely on that, and sometimes we get it at the beginning of the process. Sometimes we get it before we accept the streets for maintenance.
So they can get
they
can start building and before that certification is submitted.
Yes.
But what about getting final COs or final subdivision approval to record the plat?
The final subdivision approval, we generally ask for, if we haven't received, we ask for that certification. And truly, we rely on the staff from the city that when they sign the plat, we send a letter that says the roads have been constructed to our standards. And once we have sent that letter, we rely on the planning commission to say, do they have that certification as well before we sign the plat?
Yeah, I think what's a challenge here is the city oftentimes will go to a stricter design standard, meaning a larger pond and a smaller release. We do that. Our ordinance allows us to do that if there's known downstream drainage issues. Always it behooves the design engineer to go to that. It's a lot easier to solve it on paper than to solve it in a lawsuit. I think that what we're trying to understand is if the county can require that. Subdivisions that are actually in the county, if the county goes to that extra standard at all.
If it's not in the MS4, we can't under our rules do it. If the planning commission, if you make that requirement, we can say the planning commission's required this, you need to meet that. Now, it's an administrative review from our side. We don't go through and check the calculations. We look at some general overall report and a drainage narrative from them.
Is your MS4 not the entire unincorporated part of the county?
No, sir.
Okay.
It actually cuts off at Dawes Lane Extension, captures the east side and not the west side.
Gotcha.
And you're concerned about having that requirement, but you said something about taking a liability because you accept these common areas, correct? The county would.
We do not accept the common areas.
Or the roads, or
We do accept the
stormwater
roads.
drainage programs.
We accept the roads and the drainage as it affects the roads.
Right.
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
So where does the liability come in if the engineer did certify that it met a certain standard?
We are not familiar with all of the planning commission's requirements and with the city's stormwater ordinance, which is the authority, as I understand it, for the planning commission to make those requirements. And not being familiar with that, we may have a liability if we don't enforce something the way you would intend it in purpose or in specificity.
I think I understand. It's, in just listening to developers out there and landowners, there's a lot of activity. So this is not just like a little quiet area that all of a sudden just one little scope. So, I mean, the left's got to be connected to the right, or you're going to have failures after failures in the future. So, but we can't, I don't know how to get the standards that would give them.
I think our level of comfort is completely reliant on the certification by the engineer. If the county won't give a CO and the city will not sign off on the plat, until that is received in both departments. That gives us some level of comfort, and fortunately, we have very good engineers in Mobile County, those who's appeared before here today, and I think, you know, we have, we can put our trust in them that they stand behind their certification. And the ones I deal with, certainly I feel comfortable with. Of course, there's been many lawsuits over the last 20 years where there has been runoff problems, and adjoining property owners will sue the developer, the county, the engineer. Planning Commission has been sued before, so you know, it's not a perfect situation, but fortunately, with the engineers we have and that certification letter, that gives us some comfort. And I think that's all we can get.
Well, and again, it's spelled out in the engineering comments that that's required. So if we approve this, you know, with that in there, I mean, like you said, the engineer's stamp of approval is on the line. He presumes some liability for it as well. So, right. And so it is spelled out there that it is held to the City of Mobile stormwater standards. So.
Yeah, I was going to say that as the design firm, you know, obviously the way we look at this is that that's a condition of approval. So if the condition is you got to meet the city's regs, be it that they may be more stringent than the county, then that's what I've got to do. And so we fully accept that. We've sort of acknowledged that on pretty much all the developments that fall within your planning jurisdiction, is that there's a likely chance that we've got to deal with the more stringent regulation. So the actual review process of who does what, you know, we're happy to work with the county, the city, whoever we need to, you know, sit down with, let them review the plan, so forth, so on. But obviously in our certification, once that engineer stamps those drawings, he's buying that design. So you know, we do probably carry the most liability there in regard to the design of the subdivision. So this one, you know, we were just here last month with Alabama Pecan. I mean, same kind of situation. You know, it's been comments on both. You know, we fully acknowledge that. You know, we're not going to, you know, fight that requirement in terms of meeting the lesser standard. I mean, you know, good stormwater facilities make good neighbors.
It behooves you to get you know, a good subdivision going.
Right. So I mean, you know, we want to do right. We want, you know, we want the subdivision to be a success. You know, I mean, so we fully expect the fact that we got to meet the more stringent regulation.
Thank you.
And all the lots access the inner subdivision streets. None of them access any of the external streets.
That's correct.
Thank you.
We had the.
No, sir, I'm sorry.
Can we get a clarification
I'm
on
very
the
sorry.
traffic engineering comment that's being added to this application, please?
We have the motion in a second, but do we need to add that requirement for traffic on
We're in
there?
the
Was this the one with not proper notification? Do we need to certify that there
No,
was
that was
proper-
the one further down the
That's the next
agenda.
one.
Mr. Cameron did state that the traffic and speed study would be required as part of the approval
Yes.
per
Thank you.
Mobile County Engineering.
We have a motion that has been made and properly seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 3, I am recused on number 3. Okay, number 3.
Item number 3, 2955 and 2989 Dolphin Street. This is a PUD. There is not a recommendation by the Planning Commission, rather there's the finding of facts presented to us.
Yeah, we're having trouble hearing you because they are.
Sorry about that. 2925 and 2989 Dolphin Street. This is a PUD. There's not a staff recommendation, rather this is a application that we have finding of facts presented to us. Is there a motion?
Can we have discussion before the motion?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so as I understand it, it's an approved PUD. It's zoned and currently a PUD, approved. And they could develop based on the previous PUD, but they've come in and asked for revision to revise the access, and in their mind, improve the access.
The prior PUD expired, so
It
there's
has
no existing
expired.
PUD. Rezoning is in place as per 08, but there's no PUD now.
Okay.
And did you have any more you want us to discuss?
No, go ahead. I mean, I'm sure I'll have a lot more, but.
Okay, yeah, I just like to weigh in. In '08, so we're talking 10 years ago, I imagine having an R1 go to now a commercial corridor had a lot of interest. I'm gonna guess at that. I wasn't on the planning commission or on council at the time, but something tells me about what we heard today was a lot invested in people understanding what was being requested at the time. And on your recommendations for us to find fact, you've listed a lot of really good information for us. And I don't see where any of them add up that this PUD meets those qualifications. I don't see the one thing that I try to use as a benchmark, which is a plan unit development should have no negative effect on surrounding property. And that's could be subjective and not factual, but when you hear things like, I'm in a residential, I'm gone during the day, so if it's noisy during the day, it's not as intrusive, it's not as much of a problem, which is why we normally put B1. This is zoned, but there are lists of what can go into those classifications. I don't even know how a car wash, which I don't even understand how that's a B2, a neighborhood business, because to me, people come from all over for car washes. It's not just servicing a small neighborhood area, and I don't know whether that's being looked at under our future zoning, and I know it's not there, so we can't talk about it, but we had hundreds of residents come together to develop the map of Mobile, and there was so much excitement about long range and connecting this city with walkability and amenities that neighborhoods would flourish in and not see detractions from. I mean, and this is a huge parcel. This is not part of the Midtown movement, but we recall that group is very organized. They have master plans. And not everyone is up to speed on that. Not every area can come forward, but then when they get the stress that there's a big piece of property, it's up to the city to say, let's rein this in. Let's do what we've trying to project and give back to this community. There are so many failures with land use because it either got zoned with an intention that changed or was zoned before people got there, and we can't keep stability. We cannot keep neighborhoods flourishing. If we go in and see this plan unit development with the use, it's not turning around, and this is a huge piece of undeveloped potential that could be a service area and be a pleasant part of people that are already invested in an area, and stop this inappropriate type of environment. I mean, I just think we have this opportunity. It almost pains me to keep watching this happen over and over again with the land is already zoned. Well, the future land map, which we all part of, people want to see that come on different. And we're at the cusp. And if this was just one little slice of land, we might have to let it go. But this is a big piece of property. What goes on here sets the template. And we could make it be something so much more valuable for Mobile. Or we could keep losing neighborhoods. The way I look at it, I'm just going to tell it like it is.
And again, let me say this. I represent the Grafs. They have no financial interest in this whatsoever. This car wash could go on. They've signed their consent to be involved in this PUD. Their property is not affected whatsoever, so I don't feel I have a conflict as your attorney in saying this. Mr. Myers, whoever the developer, he can build that car wash tomorrow. He doesn't need this PUD. He can build that car wash and get a curb cut to Dolphin Street, and he's going full speed ahead. The car wash can be built without y'all's approval. Or you can consider this PUD as a better development of this site and approve it, or approve it with, as you want to amend it. So, I mean, if you turn this down, he still can build it. The use is not before you, like Mr. Pipe said. It is zoned. This is a proper use under the zoning zoning category. So, yeah.
Okay.
I don't want y'all to get, or us to get sued.
Okay, I'll just finish up and look at number D, because it says, are we preserving, protecting urban amenities and natural features and characteristics? The urban amenities are residential in that area. That whole quadrant, for the most part, where they're talking about this impact, is residential. And we're not preserving them.
I mean, Bess, this is a 37-acre track at Dolphin and Sage. I would say, you know, this is as busy an intersection as any in Mobile. For us to think it's going to be developed as low-density residential is not going to happen. If these people have built their houses in 1960, which was, I can't do math, 60 years ago, it'll be another 60 years before somebody comes along and invests money to develop that as low-density residential. It's not going to happen. It's zoned properly for this use. What I'm trying to figure out, does this access, does this PUD improve as what they can go out there and build tomorrow? And I think it does. I mean, it's the plan, you know, has some interconnectivity for the entire development. It's not really a traffic circle, but it kind of does a focal point around those two large oak trees. I mean, it's got some features, but we're going to see some errors in this future land use plan. I mean, it's a big city, and we hired somebody from out of town that came in here, and I know residences, they all came down and sat down with their crayons and showed everybody how they want to see Mobile developed, but it's not always going to be right. In this case, I don't think they got it right.
This reminds me a whole lot of the corner lot there at Airport and University that we went around so many times with, and ended up trying to protect the neighborhood, the residential neighborhood. It was a zoning question back then, but really and honestly, this boils down to a zoning question too. But we did all we could to protect that neighborhood, but then we lost in court. And I don't want us to see, I'd rather see us put some guidelines and some standards on it, and have the protection there as best we can, hours of operation, noise levels, barriers, all these things, than to just allow them free access to do what they want to do, and that they get permission and granted through the court system.
I don't mind saying I'm wrong, and Bert just corrected me. In the 08 approval, the rezoning was conditioned upon a PUD. So there's got to be a PUD. So he could do this with the one access to Dolphin Street, as that access is shown there, without the access to Sage Avenue if he wanted to. So I stand corrected, I'm sorry.
So he can't come in?
He cannot go just this lot and do his own curb cut to Dolphin. He has to have a PUD approved with either, you can do it one access, or excuse me, one curb cut to Dolphin, or one to each of those streets.
Now, I would like Mary Beth and traffic's opinion. Is the plan before us today better than, I guess, better than our alternative, which is, well, the plan before 08 is expired, so I'm trying to think.
It's moot. The zoning should be moot. Unfortunately, it's not. It should have rolled off when the PUD rolled off, because people came in, it was R1, so they were able to have leverage on what, and they thought it was a corner parcel and a bank, and then it showed open property. And they allowed that rezoning to happen. I don't know how it was advertised. I'd like to see how it was advertised for the council at the time, and I'd love to see the minutes.
Well, we did text our staff members, and they let us know that the minutes did include a statement that it would include a drugstore in the corner and the bank on this property.
It's a big difference.
So my issue here is that this gentleman bought this property with this plan in mind, and his plan fits into the zoning. If this is denied, we're basically downzoning the property based on the future land use map, which has been adopted as a guideline and is not implemented as the new zoning ordinance today. So if his, basically, like I say, you're downzoning.
Question.
Is that accurate, Doug?
My opinion as a planner would be that it's not a downzoning, because there are uses in a B2 district that could be placed here which may end up with a different site design that would be considered more compatible. So I think the issue is perhaps the use and how it will be placed on the site and the design of that site. So there would be other potential B2 uses that could be placed here. So as a planner, I wouldn't call it.
I would think we're getting, that's so arbitrary. If we're going to sit here and say a bank's going to be appropriate, it's got 4 drive-through lanes for bank tellers, and a fast food restaurant, a Chick-fil-A has multiple drive-through lanes now. I mean, we're really, to me, we're taking a lot of risk here for us to sit up here and say a bank is appropriate, a fast food's appropriate, but a car wash isn't appropriate. I'm not comfortable doing that. I mean, they're, in the current zoning classification, they're all classified the same. Best has one on Hillcrest Road that's really nice, sitting right there in the middle of a neighborhood with residential to the back and businesses across the street. Hillcrest is no different than Dolphin Street. If we look at the traffic count, they're probably comparable. In fact, Dolphin Street may carry more traffic than Hillcrest. I don't know. I don't think it's the best use.
Would you want to live next to it?
They're not going to live next door because there's 37 acres around them. They're saying they live adjacent to this. They honestly don't live adjacent to it. They live adjacent to a 22.97 acre tract. That's what they live adjacent to. They don't live adjacent to Lot 2, unless I'm looking at this plat incorrectly.
Could we discuss conditions if we so decided to approve it? Hours of operation, barriers that's not shown on the PUD. I mean, obviously there's a barrier, a pretty good sized barrier between this lot and the residential area. But I would feel better about if we could put some kind of condition on it now, as is, to give as much protection to the neighborhood as we could. The neighborhood had concerns over drain water issues, which, based on what I can tell, Sage Avenue is downstream from this property. Dolphin Street and going back to the east looks to be uphill. So I don't see how this property would honestly impact the neighborhood as far as drain water concerns go. Noise would be a definite concern. Hours of operation, that would be a concern. But I would rather see us move forward with it and address these concerns and protect the neighborhood as best we could than to not have this protection for them. Does staff have conditions?
Staff does have some conditions. Essentially, they are from the 2016 approval. So they're almost exactly the same as the 2016 approval, and Ms. York can hand those out. But also, to let you know, Lot 2 is about 500 feet from the nearest residential properties. So there is about 500 feet of undeveloped land between Lot 2 and the other properties.
But that's already zoned too.
I have a question for traffic engineering. In the absence of the rear access road, what would happen with Lot 3 there? If that Lot 3 was, you know, I guess let me pose this to you a different way. Having that rear access there, what does that do to protect that intersection as far as future access to Lot 3?
with that access as proposed right now, when Lot 3 comes forward, we wouldn't allow them another curb cut between that access point and the intersection. So it would basically guarantee that the driveways would be no closer than that access point that's proposed right now.
So from the bigger picture standpoint, it protects the intersection of Dolphin Street and Sage, makes it
Yes,
function
sir.
better.
Likely on Dolphin Street, they would have an right in, right out. That's very possible. But on Sage, we'd be a lot more protected since it's a 3-lane section and there's no restrictions on the turns.
Thank you.
Has the applicant seen these conditions?
Yes, a copy was given to Mr. Pipes.
Bert, what is the full compliance of the car wash requirements as stated in 64.12?
There are buffering requirements, which would include that a 3 to 5 foot tall evergreen hedge or landscape berm be provided along the street frontage to screen the vehicles from view along the street. So that would be required along the Dolphin Street frontage. And then,
Not
of
on
course,
the internal, not on the...
not on the internal portion, only on the public road portion. So along Dolphin Street.
But we can make that a requirement.
It is
As
a
part of the
requirement
PUD.
now, so it would apply.
But we can increase that requirement and make it for the whole perimeter of the property.
You could do that, yes.
Did the applicant receive a copy of these?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Can
thank
I
you.
ask a question? Okay, where is that?
Yeah, Commissioner, go ahead.
On the Roadhouse Grill that went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the city actually lost, the neighborhood won, but it was too late because it was built. And then the recent understanding of how we advertise information to the general public on zoning and changes. How is this not the same exact thing? That it got zoned under different conditions of what was represented and what is being developed, what is being proposed. Because a bank is indoors. Maybe they would have come down then if they knew it was a car wash and objected. But they weren't given that information. But they're told now it's zoned, so it just has to happen. We have a multiple of uses that can go into B2. I mean, it's just, I've heard this over and over again. And it's not keeping people in our city. We're losing people. We continue to harm neighborhoods. We're not meeting the needs of residents.
A question for staff, and not to ask you to go through the entire list, but what are some of the other LB2 allowable, things, the typical ones? Obviously, we've heard of bank, car wash.
LB2 or B2?
I'm sorry, B2, as the property is currently zoned.
It could be a convenience store, I believe, with gas pumps. You could have a restaurant with drive-through. You could have a restaurant like a Sonic that's a drive-in and you're served at your window. You could have retail. You could have a pawn shop with no outdoor storage. Offices.
It could be an automotive repair shop that's all indoors, just like a bank.
It could be an automotive repair shop that doesn't do engine work, but like oil changes and tire change.
So, I mean, we got to be, again, we're going to approve a bank that's indoors because they're indoors, and then the automotive shop comes in and they want to repair cars indoors, but we say, no, you can't do that because you're fixing cars instead of cashing checks. That's where I just think we're kind of just taking this where we don't need to be going.
The future land map, are there going to be changes on what falls into certain categories without rezoning people's properties to look at what is around an area?
We're in the middle of the mapping process now, but we have slated a number of revisions to the future land use map that would correlate with the new zoning classifications.
Any more commentary about commissioners?
Just want to note, as my concern with approving this PUD as is that I feel like the access road is drawn and the site plan as shown is going to be prescriptive in what can happen on Lot 3 and Lot 1 in the future. So because there's not a plan for those parcels, we're in essence taking a lot of things possibly off the table by approving this PUD as currently drawn. I'm not inclined to support this. What I would ask, though, of the commissioners, if approval appears to be likely, would be to introduce some restrictions with regard to screening, also lighting, full cutoff lighting, dark sky compliant lighting. I don't know if we have the opportunity to limit hours, whether there's any noise restrictions that we could place on this development. I kind of kick that to staff to let us know what's possible there. But
I mean, there is a noise ordinance that the city already has, which limits hours of operation as it relates to how much noise can be produced at a site. But, you know, staff doesn't have the ability to measure that beyond, that's a police department issue. But the Planning Commission does have the authority through a plan unit development to have things like full cutoff requirement. You could look at the noise issue, and then you could look at the hours of operation.
Another thought that I have, and this is from Mr. Anderson, would it be in our interest as a planning commission and as a city, since this appears to be a significant conflict in the first test of the future land use map, to hold this over and have a written opinion from the city legal staff regarding the conflicts that seem to exist between the future land use map and the current zoning?
That's what y'all want to do.
And that would give time to sort of think things through and make sure we're covering all of our bases. It would give staff time to address some additional restrictions on it and not rush through it.
I would like if we could ask the developer what his intended hours of operation are, so at least have a starting point for y'all to gauge if that's too much.
Yeah, I always get uncomfortable when we're doing a lot of changes here on the fly without having everything written out. So I make a motion we hold this over for one meeting.
Is there a second?
Is that enough? Okay.
I'll second that, anything to slow it down. Can we also get an understanding of the other car washes in town, the number of bays that they have and where they're located? I know there's one that just came up on Hillcrest on Old Shell, and it's pretty popular. It's real large, kind of unsightly, but it's near the University of South Alabama, so a lot of students are
That's
are
a gas
using it.
station as well, so I don't think that's the same as what.
No,
these
but it's the
people-
number of bays and the noise, and I'll visit it, but I'm just saying, I don't know how to compare it. Someone surmised that this is a very large one. That thing to me seems gigantic, so it might be a bigger one, I don't know. So that would be something. And I would like to see the minutes of the 2008 and the advertising that was advertised in the zoning ordinance, and also council minutes. If I need to get that from the clerk, I will.
Is that motion for just held over 1 week, one meeting?
That's right, correct.
Okay, the item's been, there's a motion, it's been properly seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any of those opposed? The item is held over.
And just to make sure everybody feels comfortable, I'm going to get Flo Kessler's help on this, in-house city attorney, because I don't want anybody to think that because I represent the grass, I'm doing anything unethical. So I'm going to get Flo's assistance on this, and she's going to help me every step of the way.
Thank you.
So that would be May 17th, for everybody's knowledge.
I'm just trying to.
I think Mr. Vallis is recused on number 7, but it will be. Do you need to leave right now?
We'll skip that meeting.
Can you give us a couple of minutes? 6, 7, 8. So just leave when you need to. Moving on to number 4, 5400 and 5464 Travis Road.
Hold over to 517.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Number 5, 6450 Half Mile Road. It's been,
Move to approve based on staff recommendation.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 6, east terminus of River Plantation Drive.
Move to approve based on staff recommendation.
Second.
All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 7, Mr. Vallis is recused.
Move to hold over to June 7th.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Number 8, 2720 Government Boulevard.
Move to approve based on staff recommendation.
Subdivision and zone.
Subdivision and zone.
Second.
All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Number 9, 558 and 560 Houston Street.
Clarification, the applicant is rescinding, I guess, the PUD or pulling the PUD?
Yes, staff had recommended withdrawal of the PUD because of the need. This building does not meet setbacks and the shed and the aggregate parking, so they will need several variances anyway, so they're going to withdraw the PUD.
So this one's been withdrawn by the applicant?
Just the PUD has been withdrawn by the applicant.
Subdivision, okay.
But the subdivision is still before you.
Okay.
Move to approve the subdivision, striking number 9, acknowledging that the PUD has been withdrawn.
Second.
All in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Hoffman, do we have any further business?
We have no former business or additional business. Richard is, I believe, able to sit out on his porch and drink wine these days, so he is better.
This meeting is adjourned.
That was such a shock. OMG. Jesus.
Love it.
Oh, yeah.
I kept thinking I'd have done maybe.
What a shocker.
I said we were adjourned, yes.
Yeah, we're done.
Meeting is adjourned.
We're toast.
I have to run.
I told you we'd be quick on the last meeting.
Yeah, sorry, I'm all sweating the fog here. Y'all be good.
Thank you, Don. You too. See you too.
Bye-bye.